Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Mem Aleph. We're going to get started from the bottom. We were talking about the topic of matanat mirta, which is a gift given in secret. So the Rashban explains that there's basically two reasons, and we saw one of them kind of as Gemara seemed to think that toward the end, which is either, okay, the Rashban says, Shema nitana la'acher kval, maybe it was already given to someone else before, and this person was just giving a gift, like said, oh, go write this person a gift to make it look like I love them and I want to do nice things for them. But really, I already given it to somebody else. And that's why I'm saying do it in secret, because if I do it out loud, in public, the person will hear and say, what are you talking about? That's mine. That's one reason. Or maybe because you want it to be a moda'at to someone tomorrow. And that's why you're doing it in secret, because tomorrow you're really forced to sell it. And you're just kind of writing this document so you can pull it out and say, look, I never really meant to sell it to this person because here's my moda'ah. And that's what the Gemara had suggested, that perhaps it could be that it's used as a moda'ah. So anyway, now we go back to this real question about ibaya lehu stamamai. So we had two versions, if you remember, of Rav Yosef. What if, and the nafkamina between the two versions was, what if I just said it's stam, like go write it, but I didn't tell you go write it in public. So the second version of Rav Yosef was, only if I say go write it in public is it a valid document. Any less than that won't be valid, will be considered a hidden one. The first version of Rav Yosef said, only if I say go write it in hiding does it mean it's a hidden document. So the question is, what if I just told you write a document of a gift to somebody else, and then they pull it out and try to prove, oh, this is mine. Now, can I claim, oh, no, it was a hidden document. I never really meant it, even though I just said it's stamp. So it really depends on whether we hold like the first version of Rav Yosef or the second version. So Rabbanit Amar lo cheshina. We're not worried just because you said go write it, but didn't say outside. We're not worried that maybe you really meant for it to be hidden, a secret document. But Rav Ashi Amar cheshina. Rav Ashi says we really have to be concerned, which means what? What does it mean to be concerned? It means, well, if you already took the gift and it's in your possession, I can't take it away. But if it's still in my possession and you try to prove, look, I have a document, I can claim, oh no, I never meant for it to be public, and therefore keep it for myself. And Hilchata, in fact, we paskin that way, cheshina. We hold like Rav Ashi that we do have to be concerned that maybe it was meant to be hidden, secret. New Mishnah. And this really maybe should have come in the beginning, and we've talked about this issue before already, but in order to create a chazaka of 3 years, if you don't have a claim as to how you got the land, that's not a chazaka, and that's our issue we're going to discuss today. Ketzad, how does that work? Amarlo, and what does it mean to not have a claim? Amarlo, mata osebetoch shali, v'hu amarlo, and then somebody comes to you and says, what are you doing on my land? I've been living there 3 years. You say, what are you doing here? And I say, v'hu amarlo, shalom amarli adam davar me'olam. Well, no one ever said anything. In other words, no one ever stopped me before. And a chazaka. That is not a chazaka, because that doesn't say how I got the land. That just says, oh, well, no one bothered me about getting off the land. But I don't actually have a claim as to how the land came into my possession. But if I say, Shemachartali, you sold it to me. Shanatatali b'matana, you gave it to me as a gift. Avicha mecharali, your father sold it to me. Avicha netanali b'matana, your father gave it to me as a gift. So I either say, I bought it from you, got it as a gift from you, bought it from your father, got it as a gift from your father. Harezo chazaka. Then I can, if I was then there for 3 years and you didn't protest, I can claim chazaka. There's one exception to the rule. Haba mishum yerusha. If I claim I inherited it from my father, I don't have to explain how my father got the land, because how am I supposed to know how my father got the land? Whether my father bought it from you, got it as a gift, got it from your father, I have no idea. It's not expected that I would know that. So the Gemara starts off with a question and says, Pshita, wait a minute. Isn't it obvious that if I don't have a claim, I'm living in your land just because I live there, no one ever bothered me before, I say, oh, well, no one ever bothered me to get off, what? So I could claim rights to the land? I need to have some. Right? A chazaka isn't just, oh, well, anyone can just be a squatter and live there and keep the land forever. So they say, well, ma'u detema, you might have thought, and here's going to be a long you might have thought, so be patient. Hi, Gavra Mizban Zavnale, maybe I really bought it. Hi, Ara, this land. Ushtar Havalevi Irkas, and I had a document, but a deed, but I lost it. Now, if that's the case, why did I come in with no claim? Well, the fact that I just said, well, no one ever bothered me to get off the land with, and I didn't say I bought it and lost the shtar, is because maybe I don't know the halacha. Savar, I might have thought, Yamina Mizban Zavnali, if I say, you sold it to me, Hi Ara, this land, Amrele, they'll tell me, Ach B'shtarach. bring your document. And I'm going to say, oh, I lost it. And they're not going to believe me. And so therefore, if someone comes before us, if we're concerned that maybe people don't know the halacha, then theoretically, what should we do as a court? We should say, say to someone who comes without a real claim, because maybe they don't know the halacha, we should say, well, is it possible you had a shtar and it got lost? No. And that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. No. Somebody comes into court without a claim. We don't think that maybe they lost their document and don't realize that that's okay, that they can claim chazaka. Because that's like opening the mouths of the foolish. That's like basically saying, oh, if you want to lie in court, well, here's a lie. We'll give you a good claim you can make because maybe they didn't buy it. And then they say, oh, I could claim that I lost the document. Great. I'll just claim that. So the court does not open and suggest that here's a good argument you could make, because that will open up a Pandora's box and all sorts of people might use that for lies. Therefore, Kamash Malan, that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. So if someone comes in without a claim, it's possible they might have lost their shtar, but we don't go and offer information and say, oh, you could claim this if it's really true. Next case. Now we have this Anav Siman for the upcoming section. Rav Anan, Shakal Bidka Ba'ari. So a flood came, like a river overflowed, knocked over the border between him and his neighbor. Atal Hadar Guda Ba'ari. So he goes and he builds, Ba'ari Dechaber. He goes and he builds a wall, a new boundary between him and his friend's field. But he did it, okay, that's Azal Hadar Guda. He returns, the Guda is the wall, Ba'ari Dechavre, in the middle of his friend's garden, in a field. In other words, Rav Anan got a little confused. Once the river washed away the border, he made a mistake and he put up the border. And as we go through the claims in the case, we're going to learn more details of exactly how it went about. But basically, they don't tell us this, but it's clear it was a mistake. We'll see from later. And he puts it up in the middle of his friend's field or on the side, right? Whatever it is, he took some of it, the other person's field. So he goes before Rav Nachman. Amarle, Ziel Hadar. So Rav Nachman says, obviously, give the land back. It's not yours. But he says, but I have a chazaka on the land now. But my neighbor didn't complain when I built the wall there. Now, why didn't the neighbor complain? Well, the neighbor didn't really know that it was a mistake. Everyone was mistaken, but we'll get back to that. And by the way, he hasn't been there 3 years yet. That's what we're discussing this. What's the situation, right? Again, does he have a claim or not? So Amarle Kiman. So Rav Anan says to him, what? Who are you holding like? Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Ishmael? Sorry, I mistake. Rav Anan said, but I have a chazaka. And Rav Nachman, the judge, says back to him, Amarle Kiman, what? Who do you hold like? Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Ishmael? The Amre Kol b'fanav la'al taravi chazaka? What? Are you holding like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Ishmael, who say, as long as you take the land and use it in front of the owner and the owner doesn't complain, it's immediately a chazaka? But if that's the case, late to the chazaka b'tayu, we don't paskin like them. So that's not going to help you. This immediate chazaka because the person saw and didn't stop you. Amarle v'ha'achil. So he says, fine. You won't accept that, but it's more than that. The person was mochel, meaning they didn't just not protest. They actually showed that they didn't care. How do we know the neighbor didn't care? The neighbor helped me build the wall. So what more mechila is that? And saying, oh, yeah, I'll help you build the wall right here, even though it's in the middle of my property. Amarle, to which Rav Nachman says to him, mechila b'ta'utu. And Rav Nachman's going to get the last word in and says, what are you talking about? That was by accident. And he says, gufach. You yourself made a mistake. Had you known, you never would have put the wall up in the other person's yard. Just like you didn't know, he didn't know. The fact that he let you put it there doesn't mean he was saying, oh yeah, I agree, this is your land. He was just as confused as you were. So that's called mechila b'ta'ut. That's a mistake. That doesn't count as anything halachically, and therefore get off his land. Rav Kahana. It's interesting in both these stories, both Rav Anan and Rav Kahana are trying to really get land that they know really isn't theirs, but I guess they think that legitimately by the letter of the law, it's really their own, which again begs the question. It's still a little weird. It's not really theirs anyway, and if they're doing asita yashar v'atov, they really wouldn't be claiming this. So one can really ask a little bit about their actions. But either way, they are bringing good halachic arguments, which in the end get knocked down, but they're trying. Rav Kahana shakel bidka ba'ari. So same thing happened with Rav Kahana, although the story will go a little differently. But a river came, washed away the border. Azal hadruguda ba'ari delodi day. He ends up putting back the wall in land that's not his own, okay, in his neighbor's land, turning out on a bed. Ata lekamed to Rav Yehuda. And he goes in front of Rav Yehuda. Azal aite tres sade. So now the other side, the neighbor, brings two witnesses. Chad Amar, Tarte Utsayata Ayel. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you this in the story with Rabbanan, but obviously at a certain point, they realized it was a mistake, and there seemed to be clear evidence that this land didn't belong to Rabbanan, right? It was just the Rabbanan was trying to claim, even though there's evidence it's not mine, but I should have a chazaka, which again was knocked down. But now, he says, one witness comes and says, Tarte Utsayata Ayel. You went 2 rows over, right? 2 furrows over into the neighbor's field. And that's how much you have to give back. But that was one witness. We know that one witness isn't really acceptable. The other one said, another witness came and said, you went in 3 rows. Now, in the end, what do we have? We have 2 witnesses, but one said 2 rows in, one said 3 rows in. Now, they both agree about 2 because 3 includes 2. So therefore, what Rav Yehuda is going to say is, Amalei, Zil Shleim Tarte Migo Tlat. You have to give back 2 out of the 3 rows because there's at least evidence of 2 witnesses that you went 2 rows in, right? One who claims 1 row in more, but yeah. Amalei. So now Rav Kahana says, wait a minute, this isn't halachically okay. Because, and there's a big debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, which we're going to see, when this kind of thing happens, do we view these as contradictory witnesses? Because one said 2 and one said 3, and 2 and 3 are not the same. Or do we view this as 2 is included in 3, and therefore we have 2 witnesses that say 2? So comes Rav Kahana and says, Kiman, who do you hold like? To which Rav Yehuda answers him, Ke Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Tanya says, I hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. And here's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's approach to the Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. There's 2 different approaches, and this is what we'll see. So Rav Yehuda says, I hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. And he said, I'm a Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Lo nechleku Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel al shtei kitei edim. She'echad omer emaneh ve'echad omer et matayim. She'yesh b'chal matayim maneh. Both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree that if 2 witnesses came and said, I owe you 100, and 2 witnesses came and said, I owe you 200, then everyone agrees that I at least pay you 100 because 200 includes 100, and we have 2 witnesses who say, I owe you 100. So based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, we could definitely make me pay 200, even though 100, even though theoretically one could say this is contradictory witnesses. We have contradictory witnesses, we throw them all out of court. But no, everyone agrees when 2 witnesses say 100, we can use that 100 to convict because the contradictory witnesses at least admit that I owe you 100. But when nechleku, ama nechleku, what is the debate between them? Al katechat, one group of witnesses. She'echad omer maneh ve'echad omer matayim, which is just like our case. One witness says 100, and one witness says I owe you 200. In this case, one witness said he went in 2 rows, and the other one said 3 rows. Shebeit Shammai omrim nechlekai dutan. Now, in that case, Beit Shammai says contradictory testimony, and we don't have 2 witnesses saying either which one claim. So we're going to throw that all out of court. But Beit Hillel omrim yesh b'chal matayim maneh. But Beit Hillel says within 200 is 100, and in the end, you do have 2 witnesses that say at least I owe you 100, so we can convict me to the 100, to pay the 100. Likewise, in this case, I'm not convict, but we can make me pay the 100. Likewise, in this case, we can make Rav Kahana give back 2 rows because Beit Hillel, and that's what we hold like, even in the case of 1 witness and 2 witnesses, everyone agrees it would work. But even in the case of 1 witness, Beit Hillel thinks that that's the case. So that's what Rav Yehuda says. But Rav Kahana says back to him, Amalei, but you know what? I can bring you a letter from Israel that in the letter it said, De'ein halachak Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. We don't hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, which would mean what? Which would mean that in a case of 1 witness, everyone agrees and they disagree about 2. It would be the reverse. And what would it be? In a case of 1 witness, or let's do 2 witnesses. In a case of 2 witnesses, it's a disagreement. Beit Shammai holds no way, no how. We split it. They contradict them. We throw everyone out of court. Beit Hillel says, no, you at least have 2 that say 100, and even the ones who say 200, 200 includes 100. So we can make you pay 100. But when you have one witness and one witness, nobody thinks that that works. Everybody thinks you don't have two witnesses saying any one thing. We can't accept that testimony, even though the 3 rows includes 2 rows. It doesn't really matter. We don't accept that. And then that's what Rav Kahana says. So we shouldn't accept any of this testimony. Amrle. So what's Rav Yehuda's reaction? Final word, just like Rav Nachman got the final word against Rav Anan in the last story. Lichi tete. You know what? You have a letter that says we don't pass like a Rosh Hashanah. Well, lichi tete means when you bring it. When you bring it, show me and I'll change my mind. But until I see that letter, I don't trust you. I don't know anything from this letter. I have a tradition that we hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, in which case you got to get out of your land or the land that's not yours. Third story. Okay, this is a bit of a different story. It has to do with the chazaka. Someone was living, okay, let's assume it was me. I was living in your attic for 4 years. You come home, you see me in your attic. So I say, right, you say, what are you doing in my attic? And I say, what do you mean? I bought it from David. Who bought it from you? Perfect. So now the question is, do we believe me that David was really the owner in the middle? Now I could believe that I bought it from David, assuming David was an owner, because I've been living there 4 years and nobody protested. But how do we know that David was an owner? I could be making that up. So they go before Rabbi Chia. We're going to see Rabbi Chia and Rav disagree about this case. If you bring witnesses that David, the one who you claim bought the property from the original owner, lived there for a day, then yes, that's fine. Ve'ilo, but if not. In other words, without any evidence that David had lived in this land, you can't claim you bought it from David or I can't claim I bought it from David because who's David? We don't know anything about it. I'm a Rav. Chavivi is the term of endearment for his uncle, who was Rabbi Chia. So Rav says, I was sitting before Chavivi, and I said to him, I don't really understand your opinion. What do you mean? Lots of people buy and sell land that night. People turn over land all the time, right? You buy it for a cheaper price. You sell it for a more expensive price. It's a great way of doing business. So there's people who never live in the property that they buy. So why do you have to require proof that David lived in the house? Rav thinks it's sufficient for me to claim I bought it from David, and that's enough. Who bought it from you? I'm a Rav, right? This is all about what kind of ta'ana is a good ta'ana. Okay, I just went back to the wrong line. But Rav continues and says, now, when I said this to Rabbi Chia, he did concede to me the following. If I come to you and I say, listen, I bought the land from David, and I saw David buy the land. Remember, we had this with the Gentile. The Gentile bought the land in front of me, I saw, and then I bought it from the Gentile. If I say and there it's the same reasoning. I saw David buy it from you, and then I bought it from David. And I've been living there for 4 years, and no one's complained. I'm believed. Why? Meheman. Because Migo, even Rabbi Chia will agree with that. Because Migo, the Ibai, Amarle, Anazavante Minach. If I wanted to, I could have said I bought it from you. And therefore, my claim I bought it from David, and I saw David buy it from you. Then it's sufficient, even if we have no proof that David was there, because I'm believed, because I could have easily have lied a better lie, and said I bought it straight from you. I'm a Rava. Rava now rules. Kavateda Rabbi Chia Mistabra. I think Rabbi Chia is more right. Seems like a more accurate approach. Okay, again, Rabbi Chia who held, unless you can prove David lived there, it doesn't work. Why? Well, from the language of our Mishnah. See, it's not so clear cut, but he's going to try proof from the language of the Mishnah, and then the Gemara is going to reject his proof on 2 counts. Dekatani, it says in the Mishnah, Haba mishum Yerusha enot tzarich ta'ana. If you come and claim you inherited the land, you don't need to prove how it got to the land, to your father's possession. But notice it says you don't need a ta'ana. It doesn't say you don't need proof that your father lived there. So they infer ta'ana delobai halcha yabai. You don't need a ta'ana. You don't need to know how your father got to the land, but you do need to have proof that your father lived in the land at some point. So the Gemara rejects this and says either dilma lo ra'aya bai velo ta'ana bai. Maybe it means you don't need a ta'ana, and you also don't need a proof that the father lived there. And in other words, it's not a necessary, not necessarily that we can infer that. And Ibayit Ema, another interpretation, Shane lokach de lo shade zuze bichti. A buyer is different. A buyer is different than an heir. An heir doesn't really check into things. They inherit something, so it's theirs. They don't have to check the ownership of it. They could, but they don't need to start checking out, did my father really own this thing that I inherited? But when you put money down and you buy something, I'm claiming I bought it from David. I wouldn't buy something for David unless I looked into it really well to check that David really bought it. And therefore, just because the Mishnah says it by an heir, that maybe you could really infer that you do need proof that your father lived there, but that's because we didn't expect you to have done your research before, so you better prove it to us. But in a case where you bought land and you claim you bought the land and no one's complained for a few years and you've been there, where we assume you really did buy the land, we just don't know, did David really own the land? We assume that you did your homework properly. It's one of the basic things you do before you buy land. You check to make sure that the land is registered in the name of the buyer. Otherwise, you're just putting down money for no reason. And we all know land is expensive, so you wouldn't do that unless you really checked into it. And therefore, we can distinguish between the cases, and therefore the Mishnah isn't really a proof for our topic. Now they ask a question. We have two more things for today. Nir'a bomai. What if David was seen measuring, surveying the land? Is that enough to say he owned it? Amar Abai, Abai says, yeah, what better proof that David owned the land than he was surveying the land? Rava Amar, Avinimish, Desayarare, Velosavim. What do you mean? People lots of times survey the land and then don't buy it. Could be he was checking out the land to buy, but it doesn't mean he bought it. Okay. Last thing. Shloshat likuchot mitzdarfim. If one person buys the land and sells it to a second and sells it to a third, and each one, let's say, lived there for a year, and altogether we have 3 different people living in your land, you didn't protest, they can create a chazaka. Even though theoretically you could say, oh, it was different buyer, different people, I didn't think to protest because I saw you the first year and I thought maybe I'll protest, I'll come back next year. Next year I see someone else in the land, and the third year I see someone else. I didn't bother protesting because I just assumed, well, you're not going to say chazaka, didn't think they bought it from each other. I just thought it was random people squatting on my land. But I can't say that. They actually, okay, now who would get the chazaka? The third person. The person who was there through the end of the 3rd year could then prove one was living there 1 year, one was living there a 2nd year, I was living there a 3rd year. Each year we were enjoying the produce. Me, the owner, I never complained. So that would work. So Amar Rava v'kulam b'shtar. It's only if they each purchase from the other with a document. Why? Because there's an assumption that a document word gets out. And we've seen this before. Okay, we'll talk about it in a minute about lien property. It's very important because if you buy land and the land is liened already to some previous sale, like I sold someone land and with achrayut, right, responsibility, that if the land gets seized, they could take from other land of mine. And then later I sell another piece of property. Now, you know, it's liened to some other property. So you know buying it that there's a risk involved, right? And that's why it's okay when they seize it from you because you knew it going in. And that's because shtar has a kol. Everyone knows about it. So in this case, Rav says as long as they bought it with a document, then the assumption is I will know. So if I didn't protest, it's my fault because I knew that it was sold from one to the other to the third. But wait, it sounds like Rav says only if it was done with a document, not if it was done with witnesses, because the assumption is witnesses, the word won't get around. But that seems to contradict something Rav says. Rav, and here we get to the nechasim mishuabadim, the lien property. If I sell the land to the second person, right, I sold to you with achrayut, with a guarantee. That means any land I sell after that, if when you come back to me, I don't have the money to pay you back. Like, okay, what happened? I owed money to someone else. They came, seized the land. Okay, let's say I owe money to Ruth. Ruth seized the property from you. And then you come back to me and want your money, but I don't have money. You can take it from any property that I sold after the time I sold you the land originally. So the whole question is, now Rav says, if you sell the land with witnesses, okay, you can, the first property that I sold to you, if I sold that with witnesses, then you can still collect the property from anything that I sold after that. Why? Theoretically, when the person went to buy from me, if we think Adim doesn't have a call, if I sold the land to you only with witnesses and not a document, how do we expect the buyer, my second buyer, to know that I had something, that this property was liened, if we assume word doesn't get around? To which the Gemara answers, no, that's different from this case of the protesting. In the case of the protesting, we assume word won't get around and I'll just see these three different people. It's not my responsibility to go check into it. Did they maybe buy from the other? I can just assume they're squatters. But hatam, likuchot inu afsidu anaf shayu. When you go to buy land from someone, if this person who bought the land in the end from me, say Naomi buys the land from me, and it's liened, and she didn't check into it well enough, well, that's her fault for not checking. As long as there were witnesses, then she could find out about it. It's true, it might not have call and everyone might not know about it, but when Naomi goes to buy my land, she should find out. Just like we said before, you should find out if I really own the land. Here, you should find out if the land was liened. And if she didn't, that's her fault. So that's how we resolve this contradiction between what we thought was contradiction and what Rav said, but really not. So in the case of three lekuchot or mitzdarfin to create a chazaka, you don't need it to be, right? It has to be, that they all bought the land from the other with a shtar, and then I should have known, and then if I didn't protest, it's my fault, and therefore they can create a chazaka. But if we assume they didn't protest because I had no idea that it was three people who had each bought from each other, then we can assume the lack of protest is meaningless and you can't create a chazaka. Person number 3 there can't claim, we've been eating here for 3 years and you didn't complain. And with that, we finished our daf. Let's just go back and review. We dealt with the end of the Matanat Mirta case, the hidden document, and what if it was just said stam, which version of Rav Yosef do we hold by? In the end, we said we're machmir, we're strict, and we are concerned for the other version, the second version of Rav Yosef. Then we had the chazaka that doesn't have a ta'ana. You have to have a claim. If you don't have a claim, to explain why you even needed to tell us that, it's pretty obvious, but we're worried that maybe the Beit Din would have to open up and make a claim and say, well, maybe you lost it, but no, the Beit Din doesn't do that. That's opening up a big potential problem that people will just teach people to lie. And then we had these 3 stories, Rav Kahana, who basically puts up the abortive in the wrong place. Also, Rabbanan, and then Rav Kahana, and each one tries to claim either they had a chazaka on it or the other person doesn't have sufficient testimony, but in the end, they're both ruled against. And then we had the third case of someone living in the attic for 4 years. And then when they came back, they said, right, I bought it from someone who bought it from you. And the question is, which statement would they say that would be believed, right? Only if we had a debate. Do we need proof that that the person they bought it from lived there or not? And even if you say that you do need proof, perhaps it would be different, or we say it would be different if I said, I bought it from a person who I saw bought it from the original owner. If I say that, then I'm believed because of amigo. And then we just had these, Rava tried to prove Rabbi Chia, that the person actually, there has to be proof they live there, the in-between person, but wasn't successful in proving it. And then we ended with these 3 people who are, we defined if by walking around the property, is that considered living there? And then we had the 3 people could create a chazaka 1 year after the other, as long as they bought the land one from the other with a shtar, in which case word we get around. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.